Welcome to the Zoom Wednesday night Bible study, and thank you for taking the time to watch tonight's video, and I hope that you are blessed by it. Tonight is lesson 5 in this new study on the miracles of Jesus. You know, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus are always central to the work and ministry of Jesus on earth. Nonetheless, miracles played a major role in that ministry, primarily as a means of confirming or proving Jesus's identity and giving witness to the good news that the kingdom of God had come near. According to Jesus, the kingdom of God is the gospel. It is the good news. And every time that Jesus healed someone, included an outcast, and cared for the poor, he gave witness to the nearness of that kingdom. The miracle stories of Jesus, and there are many, they are gifts to us. They are often multi-layered with lessons and insights still valuable to us today. And those insights are what our focus has been and will be in this study. Now, one of my primary resources has been Amy Jill Levine's book, Signs and Wonders. But as I've said every week in my nearly 4 decades of preaching and teaching ministry, I have preached and taught on these miracles a time or two, so I have my own insights to share as well. Now, the miracle that we are going to look at tonight is found only in the Gospel of Mark. It is an odd miracle, but as I'll explain in tonight's lesson, I think its oddity is to our benefit. So let's get to it. When Jesus and his disciples arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus for a healing. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. When he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" The man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking around." Then Jesus laid hands on his eyes a second time, and the man looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then Jesus sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." That's a short miracle story, but there's plenty for us to reflect upon. The first thing that grabbed my attention was that once again in the Gospel of Mark, the role of healthcare advocates is highlighted. In our first lesson in this study from Mark chapter 2, we looked at the healing of the paralyzed man who was let down through a roof to the feet of Jesus by the paralyzed man's friends. And then in a story that we did not look at in Mark chapter 7, a group of people bring a deaf man with a speech impediment to Jesus so that the man could be healed. And tonight, we get yet another miracle with the same setup. And the same lessons still apply. Those who care, those who advocate, those who intercede and pray for the sick are part of God's healing. And if healthcare and healing are a part of the kingdom of God, and they are, then a way that we give witness to that kingdom in addition to prayer is by advocating for access for healthcare for all. The blind man's friends got him to the one who could heal him. And we should do the same in whatever way is available to us. But the role of healthcare advocates is blessed and honored in this story. Now, the next two lessons that I'm going to talk about work together. And here's the second one. The healing of the blind man in Mark 8, verses 22 through 26, reminds us that Jesus offers healing in many ways. When it comes to healing and wholeness, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. The oddity of this miracle in Mark chapter 8, verses 22 through 26, is that it takes Jesus 2 tries in order to heal the man. Now, that bothers some. Many scholars argue that it bothered Matthew, Luke, and John to the degree that they simply omitted it from their gospel accounts. But thankfully, in my opinion, it's there for us to reflect on because Mark does include it, and that's a good thing. I don't believe the healing power of Jesus was ever in question. We just have too many miracle stories of Jesus where he simply touches or simply speaks, or, the hem of his garment is touched and the miracle and the healing takes place. So the fact that this one is a 2-part healing story, I think there's some lessons for us. As I just mentioned, one of those lessons, I think, is that the miracle reminds us that there is never one way that Jesus healed people. Each individual Jesus healed in the Gospels was just that, an individual. And every person had a unique story, had unique history, had a unique situation, and a unique circumstance. And the way that Jesus interacts with us and we with him will be just as varied and unique as we are. So let's always be cautious about judging someone else's experience with Jesus because it is different from ours. There is never a one-size-fits-all when it comes to interaction with Jesus. Now, before I reveal a third lesson for tonight, I want us to look at the context of the passage, and I want us to look at where in Mark's narrative timeline this healing is placed. Mark chapters 8 and 9, and that's where we're at, it is a turning point in Mark's narrative. From this point on, the focus becomes Jesus's journey to Jerusalem and eventual suffering on the cross. After our text, after Mark's 2-part healing story of the blind man, only 2 more miracles of Jesus are recorded: the healing of the boy possessed by a mute spirit and the healing of blind Bartimaeus on the roadside on the way to Jericho. In other words, nearly all the healing stories of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark are told in the first half of the Gospel. And scholars point out that this isn't accidental. If you recall, at the beginning of every lesson in this study, I mentioned that the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus is always central to his work and ministry on earth. Supernatural miracles and healings are important, for they give witness to the coming kingdom of God, but they are never the most important thing. The cross and the empty tomb are. Scholars believe that this de-emphasis on healing in the second half of Mark is purposeful so that there isn't a misunderstanding of what Jesus was trying to accomplish. For despite all the displays of power Jesus performs, in the end, we will see God's greatest work of mercy and salvation revealed not in power, but in weakness. Now, that's the location of the story in Mark's narrative. It's a turning point. But the context of the story also helps in interpreting it. In the verses just prior to our text, Jesus asks the disciples a series of questions, and some of which include, do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you not remember? Do you not yet understand? And then right after that question, do you not yet understand? Then we are given this two-part story of the healing of the blind man's sight. And thus, the two-part healing of the blind man becomes a metaphor for the life of faith. You know, it often takes time for true spiritual insight to arrive. This metaphoric interpretation lines up with the context and Mark's narrative timeline. Thus far, the disciples have perceived Jesus' identity and mission only partially. They respond to Jesus' predictions of his suffering with the same limited insight. Yet in time, after the cross and the resurrection, that's when they finally get it. They will finally have a much fully awareness of Jesus' mission, but that will come in time. Now, looking back on my own life of faith, how many times have I needed a second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth chance to finally get it? How many chances have I needed to perceive or understand or learn something? And we especially need some of these chances when we consider that God often works in our lives in ways that we don't see coming or expect. Sometimes it just takes time for true spiritual insight to arrive. Here's something else. Even though the blind man didn't initially see clearly, Jesus did not give up on him. Likewise, Jesus doesn't give up on us when we don't initially see clearly. I don't know about you, but that's good news. So to review, it's definitely an odd miracle, and it's only told in the Gospel of Mark. But I believe that we have takeaways from it that are helpful to us. What are the takeaways? The role of healthcare advocates is honored and blessed by Jesus. Let's not forget that first point. Second takeaway, interactions with Jesus are never one size fits all. And then our third lesson tonight, when viewed metaphorically, the healing speaks to the life of faith. It often takes time for true spiritual insight to arrive, but Jesus never gives up on us. Until next week, when we'll look at another miracle, God's abundant grace and peace to you.